Moraga Vice Mayor Carrie Hillis, and Moraga Councilmember Lisa Malio. We're also pleased to be joined by the Town Manager of Moraga, Scott Micknick. And we are also joined by the President of St. Mary's College, Roger Thompson. I will now turn it over to Mayor Woloke to welcome you to the town of Moraga and to introduce the Congressman.
Kaylee, thank you very much. As Mayor of Moraga, it is my honor to welcome you all here tonight, those present and also those who are participating by live streaming. We are going to have a town hall tonight held by our U.S. Congressman Marc DeSaulnier, who represents the 10th District for California. Setting the scene, town halls have an important role in U.S. democracy. It's an opportunity for constituents to hear directly from their representatives and also for the representatives to hear directly from the constituents. I hope all read Congressman DeSaulnier's very impressive and extensive biography that was available with the invitation materials. It substantiates his long, successful support and his impact in the public service. Congressman DeSaulnier, thank you so much for your support to your constituents. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for the introduction. Thank you to the city of Moraga. Thank you all for being here. And thank you to St. Mary's. I just got some spiritual advice as I came out here from Brother Chris, so thank you. I was taught by the Jesuits, so I always have to get absolution for that when I come here. But the vocations and the dedication of the people who work here, really remarkable, and I have nothing but admiration for the work they do and the people who leave here. I was grateful to be the commencement speaker some years ago, and it's both intimidating and wonderful. So thank you all for being here, and particularly thank you to the public safety folks. You know, we used to do town halls and we didn't need to have quite the security we do now, but I really appreciate, and let's give them a round of applause, all our public safety people. They have tough jobs. So we do a lot of town halls. I'm very proud of the fact that our staff, we do more town halls than anyone else in Congress the last 10 years. I enjoy doing them. This is something I've been doing lately. How many people have been to one of our town halls before? Frequent flyers, but that's great. Poor things. Brother Chris will give you absolution, or I don't know if there's still purgatory, but there's political purgatory. So thank you for coming. I'm going to go through a PowerPoint. It is dense. There's a lot of information here, but I'm going to go through it really quickly. Our last PowerPoint, I got too carried away, and I spent over a half hour. So we want to get to questions, and I want to try to answer them as succinctly as possible. As I go through this, you can go back and refer to this. It's available on our website and our social media, so you can use your phones if you want to go back. Just a little framing here. This is our district. There are 435 districts in the United States House of Representatives. Every 10 years, they're redistricted, required by law, including every elected official in the country, from special districts to city councils where they have districts to the House of Representatives. The previous one was, and it's based largely on population changes. We actually lost a seat in California this year because our population wasn't growing as it has been for decades. The old seat was all in Contra Costa, and it covered a lot of the 80 corridor all the way out to Antioch. The Redistricting Commission, which we approved as voters 20 years ago, so it's a second iteration. Before that, it was the legislature, and if you remember the adjective, I guess, gerrymandering, the voters decided to have an independent commission, and I think they've done a good job so far. So this district changed a little bit. It got out of the 80 corridor and went south into Dublin, so I now represent part of Alameda and then all of East County. So, next one. In every legislative body, and when I started on the city council, you have subcommittees, usually areas of interest, and you develop subject area expertise if you're fortunate enough. Those are the three I'm on. I'm very honored, let's see, a week ago, 10 days ago, I was in the Democratic caucus meeting, and somebody tapped me on my shoulder, and I turned around. It was our leader, Hakeem Jeffries from New York, and he put his hand out and he said, "Mark, I want to make you the ranking Democrat on ethics." Yeah. I have some funny stories. Some of them I can't talk about by law, but if you remember George Santos. Apparently you do. And then the two standing committees are Education and Workforce, which I've been on the whole time I've been in Congress. My predecessor, George Miller, was on this committee for many years. He was also represented this area for 40 years in Congress. He was also on the House Resources Committee and chaired and was the ranking member on those committees. So we've had pretty consistent 50 plus years on education and labor. And then transportation and infrastructure. For those of you, my background has been in transportation in particular, both these subject areas. And those are the subcommittees. So that first ranking member means you're the senior minority member. That one I've been on for quite a while. When we're in the majority, I'm the chair. Health, Employment, Labor, and Pensions, also known as HELP, has jurisdiction over all the employer-employee relationships, and we spend a lot of time on health care right now because that's a mess. We've got issues in Medicare and Medicaid. That's in a different committee, but that one in particular. And the current chair of that committee is from Georgia, Rick Allen, and he's a very good friend, conservative Republican, but we've had multiple meetings about how we can work to make it more efficient. And he's a former employer. I'm a former small business owner. Some of you know I ran restaurants. That was my tough career, by the way. That was harder than this, believe it or not. So those are our committees. Next. This is, and you know, one thing on the headline here was fighting back. I use that as a term of politics. You know, one of the things I feel very strongly, and I think we'll talk about this more, about my perspective on the Constitution of America and some of the things that are happening right now. But within that framework, this country is about having that dialogue, and it's fighting, but it should be civil and respectful. When we've got away from that, you can be principled and passionate and still be respectful and civil and understand that people in other parts of the country and in the other party, I always bring up Virginia Fox, a very good friend who's one of the most conservative members, was chair of the Education Committee. People think we're a comedy team because she introduces me, and all the frequent flyers have heard this because I love her. She's from North Carolina. She introduces me to New Republicans as, "This is DeSaulnier, our favorite socialist from San Francisco." And I laugh and I go, "Virginia, by your standards, I'm a Trotskyite." But there's still, that's the way the country works. And I always tell Virginia, I couldn't get elected in your district, you couldn't get elected in mine, and I respect that. And where we have differences, and we have some pretty strong differences, we let each other know that. So anyways, these are some of the accomplishments. The 2 years we got started, because I've been involved in transportation for a long time and air quality, it was really remarkable. Since the Eisenhower administration, we haven't had this kind of investment in our nation's infrastructure. The civil engineers do a scorecard every year. It's very nonpartisan engineers. And we have a huge 50-year need just in maintaining our infrastructure. That's transportation, water, wastewater. This is a huge accomplishment. I was very proud to be very involved in this. Some of my bills, one of them, unfortunately, the current administration has just stopped, and we're fighting in court over it, is the EV charging network. I had a bill called the Clean Corridor Bill, and it was incorporated into this bill. It's an $8 billion project. I was appointed by 3 different governors, 2 Republicans and 1 Democrat when I was a county supervisor to represent the Bay Area on the California Air Resources Board. That is preeminent in fixing air quality standards. The U.S. Clean Air Act signed by Richard Nixon gave California a waiver to go beyond the U.S. EPA, but it has to be based on public health findings, and then it can be challenged in court. We've never lost a challenge in multiple administrations. I always remind my Republican colleagues, Richard Nixon signed it, and Ronald Reagan was the governor of California who signed the California Clean Air Act. So times change, but this is really, I'm hoping this will just continue to be good. For every 1 job this creates, it's a multiplier of 14. As a former small business owner, all these people who get good jobs doing this construction, they go out and spend money in the community, and it helps restaurants and businesses and municipal government. So a lot of good stuff in there. That last bullet is important for us, given our proximity to 3 national laboratories. That's the CHIPS and Science Act. We weren't spending enough money in research. The Chinese are spending a lot of money in research to catch up to us, and in some cases surpass us. So we're next door to Berkeley National Lab. Lawrence Livermore is down in Livermore, and of course, I know there's a lot of Berkeley alumni here. The University of California in Berkeley is the preeminent public research university in the country, if not the world. So all of this is really good news for us, because it'll go into all these wonderful institutions in the Bay Area that are preeminent in the world in terms of innovation and technology. Let's see, next. This is just a history. The last time we actually had a balanced budget was during the Clinton administration. Congressman Miller was very involved in this, so they did pay-as-you-go. So it's important we balance our debt. We don't want to have a huge debt. There are times to spend money as a former small business owner, and there are times to back off. So it's sort of interesting, this budget chart, because it goes against sort of stereotypes. Next. These are just some of the things that we've got to work out in court. You know, the way this process works, I feel like sometimes I have to go back. There's a tutorial for 6th and 7th graders, how a bill becomes a law. The way the system works is, whether it's you're in the city council or in the Congress, you need to get a majority for most bills, statutes, laws. In the case with a bicameral legislature, which is true for every state except for Nebraska, they have unicameral, 1 house. In the Congress, you've got to go through both houses. You put a bill in, it goes to the Rules Committee. The Rules Committee assigns it to committees of jurisdiction. So if it's a bill like my bill, it would go to Resources, Energy, and Transportation. I've got to get it through all those bills, then you got to get to the House floor, then you got to get a majority, and then it goes over to the Senate. Then it gets signed. So all those bills, if you want to change them, you've got to go through the same process. So much of what's happening right now, we are challenging in court, and we are winning. Let's have a discussion about changing the laws. There are some laws that should be changed, and a lot of them should be looked at. When I was in the legislature, I always supported the idea of, Texas has something called the Sunset Commission. So it's an independent commission that actually looks at laws and makes recommendations on ones that need to be changed or terminated. So anyways, some of these are just really bad. You and Moraga, of course, we spent a lot of time working with your public safety people about, we don't want to have what happened in Pacific Palisades or Paradise happen here. Your city council's been great on this. We want to be prepared because you are in a high-risk area, and you all know that. So we've got to do more of that. And then, because I'm a survivor of cancer, stage 4 cancer, I've spent a lot of time. I founded something called the Bipartisan Cancer Survivors Caucus. We have Republicans and Democrats have put more money into cancer research because of the remarkable things. The National Institutes for Health in Bethesda, I've been out there multiple times. It's extraordinary. This country should be so proud of it, the work they do out there, and cutting their funding is really, I don't understand it because it extends people's lives. I just took my chemo pills. Most of the basic research came from there in the Department of Defense. My cancer doctor, when I got diagnosed 10 years ago, said 15 years ago, we would sprinkle some water on you and tell you, enjoy whatever time you have. Now, because of those people, I can live a normal life. And that, yeah. I mean a normal life physically. I'm not talking about my job. So these are just things that when I go back next week, we had some discussions with my Republican colleagues. It's like, come on, folks. We support NIH in a nonpartisan way. And by the way, it's extended a lot of members of Congress's life. So real life experience in my little caucus with a colleague from Georgia, Buddy Carter. And we talked about this on the floor last week, that we can't do this. The last time he was president, he suggested a $7 billion cut, and we collectively worked to actually add more money into it. And they helped by working with the administration. So these are just sort of not good ideas. And they're almost all, he doesn't have the authority to do it. You do have some administrative authority, but depending on what the law says. But those are things we've got to keep working on. Next. These are the funding freezes. So again, I'm spending more time than I wanted to, but you can look at these, and we're doing what we have to do, which is in the minority, keep expressing and working our adamant disapproval of many of the things they're doing. It's just not an efficient way to run things, to tell you the truth, from my perspective. So this is, I just talked to your city manager about a grant that's been approved for you folks here. Last night I was in Martinez. They've got a grant for their waterfront. The night before that I was in Walnut Creek. We've got grants that I was part of. So when you freeze them, there's statutory requirements, and they're different for each law a little bit, but there's a process to go through if you have questions about impropriety or it not being spent right. That's part of the bureaucracy that people complain about. But on the other hand, without those safeguards, what we used to have in this country is a lot of graft and inappropriate expenditures of funds. So somewhere in there is a balance. All right. Next. Again, foreign aid, a lot of these things you're familiar with from the news. We can go to the next one. So this is when I go back next week. We have to have a funding bill for the government by, I think it's March 15th. So it's coming up very quickly. You'll realize Congress, when it functioned, we used to have a bill that funded the government for a year and then would start the process again. Now we're going month to month, week to week, so we run up to these deadlines, which we've already gone through 1, 2 in my time in Congress, where people, TSA officers just don't get paid. So depending on, again, the guidelines in the law, federal employees won't get paid. That's not fair. They still go to work every day. So a lot of these things, the majority will go through reconciliation, which requires just if it's budgetary and not policy, and of course there is, money affects policy, but the laws are you can do it with a simple majority. So in the Senate, the filibuster law doesn't apply. We did it when we were in charge to get the budget passed, and the Republicans are doing the same thing. So that's the way the rules are, but we're going to have a lot of discussions about that. In the Senate and the House, Republican leaders are dealing with that. The Republican caucus in our House is, as I read and when I go back and talk to my colleagues, they're having their own issues about, because they only have a 3-vote majority. They need all their members to vote, and there's a hardcore group of people who want everything within their caucus. And then they have a dynamic that you've heard about. This is how Kevin McCarthy lost his speakership. Next. So elections matter. This is just a physical demonstration about this is who controls. We have 2 vacancies in Florida, Matt Gaetz and Congressman Waltz, who's now in the midst of negotiations in Ukraine. So those are the 2 vacancies. They're Republican districts. It's not impossible. The Democrats could win them, but most likely. So that's the makeup in the Senate. The previous Senate was 50-50 with the vice president breaking the tie, so now they have a clear majority. So that's what we're dealing with. When people ask me, what are you doing? Elections have consequences, so you got to win elections. We're very focused on the midterms in 2 years for the House. In the meantime, there are things you can do to argue and demonstrate, challenge in court, and I've been out in the community with like-minded people, legally, peacefully protesting and demonstrating our opposition to what's happening. And that's part of democracy. I do that outside of my government office because I can't use government resources when I'm doing political things. That's part of my job as the ranking member of the Ethics Committee. And I know to most people, you know, obviously it goes back and forth, but it's there for a good reason. You can't use the resources, the city manager's resources to get you reelected. I can't use my government office to run campaigns. And there is a pretty well-defined line there from a legal standpoint. Unfortunately, we occasionally have members who don't recognize that line. And then that's where my job comes in. The Ethics Committee is interesting. It's the only committee in the House that has equal majority and minority party members. So there's 5 Republican members, 5 Democratic members. And then the chair is the Republican ranking member, and then I am his, who's a good person who we work, he and I have a good relationship, Mike Getz from Missouri, I think. It's one of those places we fly over. Oh, they'd be mad at me for saying that. I'm kidding. This is just, elections are important again. This is this last election. If we had the same percentage that voted in the last presidential election, the election would have had a different outcome. So just 2% more people who vote. You know, a third of the country didn't vote, which is not unusual, unfortunately. So this is the reality. We really want people to be engaged and thoughtful. Read your voter's pamphlet, come to town halls, and whether it's a city council, a House of Representatives, a school board member, your vote does matter and your engagement. I don't think most Americans realize how much they could be involved, particularly in local government, but any government, right? I mean, if somebody goes out and walks door to door in Moraga, they're a political power. And I've walked to a lot of doors in Contra Costa over the years. There's nothing like having a candidate go to your front door. I know it's annoying sometimes, but years ago I had a partnership with the state senate and the Duma in Moscow and St. Petersburg. They came here, we went there, and one night, president of the Moscow Duma, times have changed. I wouldn't be able to do this now, but this was 15 years ago. We were at a restaurant in Moscow, and he said, well, you're running for re-election, what do you do? And I said, well, I go door to door and go to people's houses. And the translator translated, and the people in the Moscow Duma said, oh, that'd be too dangerous here. It's dangerous where I come from sometimes too, but it's okay. It's the essence sort of this. So these are things that you've read about just recently. Again, we're just gonna, the top one is obviously very, very concerning. Your privacy is important. We're all taxpayers. We don't want other people to have our Social Security number, all those things, so we're gonna have to fight to protect that. That bill I'm a co-sponsor of, we just introduced it last week, and we're trying to get 4 Republicans to join us to send the message that we all value protecting your privacy. Okay? We send a lot of letters. I know that doesn't seem like a lot, but it usually gets people's attention because you're always looking for those numbers for everything you do when you're operating effectively in a legislative body or in the administration. So we've been doing that. It is frustrating because we're wondering if people are reading it or counting our votes. Next. So this is just the litigation. We'll continue to provide these for people appropriately, but there's a lot of litigation. And I'm proud of the fact that we were prepared for this. So far it's gone better than I thought it would go in terms of having partnerships. For a lot of these cases, Congress specifically doesn't have standing in the courts. So you've probably been reading about, some of you I'm sure have been reading about the issues of standing, which when you first put the lawsuit in is what the federal judges look for is, are you being affected by this case, or do you have standing so that you can actually sue? So this, I love this Brandeis quote. Louis Brandeis, one of my favorite Americans, a remarkable first Jewish American to be appointed to the Supreme Court. He and Oliver Wendell Holmes. Some of you know I like to read a lot. There's a great book about the two of them and their relationships, and they wrote what continues to be the opinions on First Amendment rights. But that quote is a great one. We may have a democracy or we may have wealth concentrate in the hands of a few, but we can't have both. This is something I bring up. I do town halls on Thomas Piketty. If anybody's read his work, the great French economist, his history of free market, mixed market, capitalistic systems is a history of our evolution. When you get really concentration of wealth, humans don't like that. They want opportunity. They want to feel like people aren't just inheriting. And there's nothing wrong with that. But when it's this level of concentration, his analysis is there's always a problem. I mean, civil war, unrest. And we've been running at this for a while, and a lot of it's our tax policy and others. If we just went back to the Eisenhower administration and had the policies that worked there but updated them, we'd have a more robust middle class, and young people could afford to get a house, and we tried to do this in the first 2 years of the Biden administration. We got a lot of it done. Unfortunately, we couldn't get all the Democrats in the Senate, and we needed them all to vote for it. And again, we keep working with our Republican colleagues, trying to convince them you need a middle class and you need opportunity in America. That's what this country's supposed to be about, is if you work hard and you have talent, you should be able to raise a family, have a house, and retire in peace. And we've done that before, but our policies reflect the swing back and forth. And right now, it is my opinion, and some people much smarter have studied it more than I have. This is the problem. I don't have a problem. We don't have a problem people being successful, but the concentration is a problem. Next. This is just another graph from the Congressional Budget Office. I always provide sources so you know where I'm getting this stuff from. But this is just another graph of concentration from 1980. If you go back to the 50s, it's even more pronounced, where we had a really nice, we had the largest gross domestic product consistently. Now, there were other reasons for that. We didn't have a lot of international competition in manufacturing and other things coming out of World War II. So it wasn't just policy, but policy had a lot to do with it. Next. This is how politics has affected it. So that little line is Citizens United. In 2010, this was a 5-4 decision by the Supreme Court that changed precedent that said money equals free speech, and as long as you're outside of a congressional campaign, you can spend whatever you want. In a congressional campaign, we have legal limits to how much we can take individually and from corporations and from labor unions. So this has just changed the dynamic in federal elections and in many ways in local elections, because it applies to what's called independent expenditures. So people with a lot of money on the left and the right, but it's predominantly the Koch brothers network is really, they funded the litigation. So to me, there's a correlation pretty clear correlation between our campaigns and that concentration of wealth. Let's see, this is just outside, you can see how it's just skyrocketed. And that's outside our campaigns. That's in addition to our campaigns. Next. This one is a Piketty chart, and the blue line is capital, and the red line is wages, labor, and benefits. Since 1950, Abraham Lincoln famously said that labor, meaning wages, and capital should always be balanced in America. If you lose that balance, nothing wrong with investment. All of us lucky enough to have a home in Contra Costa, and we're lucky to have that wonderful investment, our pensions. But when they get this far out of balance, that's what we get concerned about. So people who are working for a living and can't afford a house or can't afford investments, they are disadvantaged by this right now, and it's a problem for us. Next. So I don't need to go all through that. I've pretty much said that. We need to keep working. We need to win elections, but we have a two-party system, and we've got to work within that system and respect one another. And we try to do that. I try to do that. I think I'm effective at it. I am a former Republican. Some of you probably remember that. I tell kids under 40 that I used to be, not kids under 40, I'm dating myself. Kids nowadays, God damn it. Sound like that cranky guy on the bench I used to make fun of. I lost my train of thought here. It's just the balance, and the two-party system, that's where I was going is, and one of my favorite lines from Jefferson was, somebody asked him, if you've ever gone to Monticello, you go in the vestibule there, and he's got a bust, he had a bust from Hamilton and a bust of his facing each other. And somebody asked Jefferson, why do you have Hamilton there looking at you? You don't agree with him on anything. And he goes, that's why I have it. So that's, I mean, since our founders, that's what Hamilton was, you know, conservative, believed in individual rights. Jefferson, more so the social contract. So we're always trying to balance that in America and in human relations. When we get it right, it's a beautiful thing. When it gets one way or the other, my own view is we have problems. So with that, I will stop, and we will go to questions.
Thank you so much, Congressman. All right, as a reminder, if you have a completed question card, I recommend that you raise that in the air and one of our staff members will come around to collect that. Please make sure to include your contact information at the top. We will not be able to get to every single question tonight, so as long as we have your contact information, we will be sure to respond to you following the town hall. All right, let's get started. We're gonna do something fun for the first one. We tried this at our last town hall where we let the congressman cherry pick the first question.
This is not rigged. I didn't get much of a laugh.
As long as I can read this one, this will be the first question. Is $50 million or more set aside for Trump-proofing California? How much is the state deficit at this time?
So the question is $50 million, and I believe you're referring to money that the legislature and the governor appropriated to fund litigation against the current president administration, and is that enough, and what's the state deficit? I don't know what that was my old job in the Assembly and the Senate. The California Constitution, unlike the U.S. Constitution, actually requires it to be balanced. There are financial, you're allowed to have debt, for instance, and service some of your programs with debt. So it's not unusual for private or public agencies to do that. But that is a legitimate question. I wish I could speak with more authority. Thank you. The Christian brothers still speak to God. I got to laugh out of Brother Chris. You know, so that's a legitimate question. I'm happy to get back to you with the more specific parts on the answer to the $50 million and what they plan on doing it. I'm sure that the governor and the legislature would argue it's a good investment because it's it's the way we go about protecting programs that we have funded in California. The federal government funds a lot of programs in California, Medicare, Medicaid. County government is very dependent on federal dollars in Contra Costa in California. So the money does come down, but it also goes up. So you have to have maintenance of efforts, whether it's transportation or other projects from local government and from the state. So it's a partnership. It used to be in transportation that the federal government provided 80% of the funding and local government 20%. That's flipped since the Eisenhower administration. So that's one of the reasons that infrastructure bill is important. So balancing all of these numbers is something that should be, and usually is, bipartisan. You come at it from different perspectives, but I don't know, well, and it's like the Elon Musk stuff. I'm not aware of anybody who wants government to be inefficient. We come at it from different perspectives. For me, as a small business owner in a business that had very thin margins and high mortality rates, I like working with numbers and I like making programs work. If I'm a progressive liberal Democrat, and I say this to Virginia, if I can get more services to people so they don't need services, I'm all for that if it's more efficient. If you, Representative Fox, want to get it back to the taxpayers, then let's make it more efficient. So that's a long answer to your question. We'll follow up with the specifics only because it relates more to California policy that I'm not as familiar with right now, because I used to have that job and I don't now anymore. Not that I'm unaware of what they're doing, but I can't speak to specificity on this.
Thank you, Congressman. The next question is from Barbara. As a member of the Subcommittee on Aviation, have you spoken to Sean Duffy regarding necessity to rescind the firings with the FAA? What are the chances the 400 laid-off workers will be reinstated?
Good question. So again, I'll repeat it just briefly, although Kaylee, I think, did everyone hear the question? Okay. So the new Trump administration's new Secretary of Transportation is a former colleague, and the layoffs at FAA. I talked to a couple of FAA labor representatives today by phone about this issue. I have to fly every week. I'm very familiar with the aviation system. I spent a lot of time on reauthorization of the Federal Aviation Administration. I'm very proud of the work that we were able to do in there to help pilots and air traffic controllers. We're finally starting to get more air traffic controllers. We're very proud of the aviation system in this country. It's quite safe and remarkable, but it's been showing signs. And just in the last couple of weeks, you can see very dramatic signs. But before that, we were seeing signs of near misses, runway incursions. One of the ones that got me started was 10 years ago. If you remember this, Air Canada they thought they were landing on a runway at SFO, and there were 3 loaded planes on what they thought was a runway, which is actually a taxiway. The pilots didn't read the information saying that the runway and the taxiway, one runway and one taxiway at SFO was closed for construction. So we went through this whole thing about, well, why didn't you read that? It's in the documents before you got in the plane. So we've changed a lot of that, and it's been successful, but letting people at the Federal Aviation Administration train professionals in safety, just firing them is madness. I mean, it's like just letting all your policemen off and expecting everything to be fine. In this instance, when it comes to flying, you need professionals to be able to make sure that aircraft are flying safely. I mean, look I fly in a DCA Reagan every week and out of there. I've been on that approach that plane hit the helicopter with. Even with people, you still have this. So we've got to get those FAA people back at work as soon as possible. Like I have to fly Tuesday. So I have not talked to Secretary Duffy. I have communicated with a letter. We had a lot of conversations with Secretary Buttigieg. She became a friend. So yeah, but we're trying to communicate. One of the things that's happening right now is because of how this is so rapid and through all agencies, it's literally hard to keep up with. But I'm on the Committee of Jurisdiction, so I'm responsible.
Thank you, Congressman. The next question is from Ellen. What will happen if the Trump administration ignores court rulings?
Well, that will be... That's a really scary thought. You know, this is where the Supreme Court is going to have to, hopefully by consensus, I know, but these are the institutions we have. We've got to fight for them and keep pressure on them. There is a legal school of thought that people can be held civilly responsible and criminally responsible. So not the President of the United States, probably because of the recent Supreme Court decision on a 5-4 decision about his level of exposure. But we're going to have to keep fighting, and that is a real danger. I mean, I'll tell you, I usually sleep reasonably well, but lately I have not. And that's one of the big things, is if he pushes that, and a lot of the judges who've been doing the decisions against his decisions are, a couple of them were his appointees. So it's not wild-eyed liberal judges who are acting, it's judges that reflect the country's difference of interpretation. They're pretty much consensus is these are unlawful and constitutionally unacceptable, illegal actions. So far so good. And hopefully, but these These are unprecedented times, folks. So we're going to have to stay after it and do it in a way that's forceful. But, you know, got to be careful here, too, because Mr. Bannon and others, my own feeling is in reading what he's written and others, they want to fight, and they want a physical fight. We're going to have to respect law, but fight. And historically, this country's been pretty good about that, with some notable exceptions that hopefully we will revisit.
Thank you. The next question is from Charles. What are you going to do to protect Social Security?
Well, looking around the room, there's a lot of people with the same hair color as me. I really don't think they would be, and talking to my Republican colleagues, that would be a third rail, that and Medicare. So we're going to do everything we can. It is protected statutorily, but if they start moving money around, we're going to have to be very loud about it. And I just can't imagine, you know, Social Security is so important everywhere, but if you're in a rural area, it's really important because your costs of living are less than we do, so it's not to diminish our need for and we paid into it. It's a contractual relationship. It's like a pension fund, but more so. So we're just going to have to stay on it. My own belief is I think we have to be on guard and not be naive, but I can't believe the political stupidity that would entail. We would win a very large majority if they did that, would be my opinion.
Thank you.
Same with Medicare.
The next question is from Madeline. We need to entice the young voters. How are you going to appeal to them?
Well, that graph I had about voter turnout last time, that was one of the real disappointments. Young people were really engaged, and then they dropped off dramatically. This is a real problem for this country. As somebody on the Education Committee, and we talk about civic education and history in America, we're not doing a good job about explaining to people that people died, and literally died for your right to vote. To be a citizen of the United States and be able to vote is a sacred trust. So we've got to do a better job of reaching kids and making them realize how important this is. It's been a challenge in this country and in other developed countries, but particularly in this country. The UK actually I've done a good deal of personal research on this. They're better at getting young people to get out and vote. Some of it's their history and their culture, but we have to do a much better job and making it relevant to young people too. So there's a number of things, and I can answer that question with more details because there are a lot of things you can do to get that been researched that show that will get kids more engaged. But we've got to start at a very early age, and we've got to get it in the school system. It's not about indoctrinating people to vote one way or the other. It's just making people realize how sacred it is to be a citizen of the United States of America, and that responsibility is civic engagement. Read your voter pamphlet and vote regularly. It's not acceptable that a third of of eligible voters in the most powerful, successful democracy in the history of humankind just don't vote. And particularly for young people, but for all of us. And one of the things the UK studies show is that when you get people to vote when they're 18, the likelihood of them staying and voting and reading their voting pamphlet is just, we know best practices. If you learn that at an early age, you'll keep doing it. And that's irrespective of what your ideology or party is.
Thank you. The next question is from Jenny. What do you think we as citizens can do to have the most impact against the constant attacks on our democracy?
Well, I mentioned them, yeah. You got to be engaged. I mean, you're here. Yeah, I'm going to explain. That's good. I love town halls. So you got to be engaged. I'm repeating myself, so forgive me. You got to be engaged on the street. If you feel strongly about Elon Musk, there's organizations on the political side that are out there doing things about it. Engage. Do it legally, but do it forcefully. And I'm sorry. I'm trying to explain. This won't work if we're screaming at one another. There are 1,000 people in the room. So I'm going to try to do the best I can. If it's not sufficient, please come up after or follow up and I can give you more detail. So I can't, because we're in a government meeting, I can't tell you where to go on the political side, but it's not that difficult. You can Google engagement and put in your favorite thing that you're upset about, and you'll get information. I hope I can say that. Well, that I can, because you could be any kind of engagement, Republican, Democrat, whatever. And then we've got to fight through the process. We've got to win elections. We've got to win the election in 2 years, which starts now in the House. And then we've got to fight them in courts. So those three things. And we've been through this before in this country. You got to be engaged. You've got to be out there. And if you're upset about things, we're happy to help you, but I can't do it on government time. I can't direct you to political organizations when we're here. And I hope you understand that. There's a good reason for those ethics laws.
Thank you. The next question is from Carolyn. How difficult would it be for Trump to run for a third term?
It would be unconstitutional. So if he does, the courts are required by the U.S. Constitution to tell him he can't. It's against law. And if he pushes that, it's the same as the other questions. We're going to have to fight. Americans are going to have to fight, period. And my argument would be this should have nothing to do with who you voted for or what party you're in. This is about the Constitution of the United States of America that served this country well in the world for 250 years. You fight like hell, but you fight within the rules. That's not in the rules. It's called the U.S. Constitution, which is the best governing document that the human species has come up with from thousands of years of experience.
Thank you, Congressman. The next question is from Lisa. I have 2 special needs grandchildren. What can be done to make sure special needs children don't get funding cuts in Medicare, Social Security benefits, and education?
Well, let's talk. This is a subject area of great passion for me. I have a very close relationship with the special needs folks all my time and the developmentally disabled community. So this is one of the problems with closing the Department of Education. That's what they do. They protect the vulnerable people, special needs kids. We don't put enough money into that. Cases like autism are going up. There's more need for counselors in schools and in kids' lives. And I had a bill passed, bipartisan Mental Health Matters Act in the House to start to address these issues. Unfortunately, I didn't get it through the Senate, but we're going to keep working on it. So for special needs people, we need to protect the Department of Education. It's a bureaucracy, yes, but it serves people with special needs kids, cerebral palsy, all these very vulnerable people, and it's worked well to protect them. They're mainstreamed, and again, it was bipartisan. A lot of these bills were passed in the Nixon administration, where Tip O'Neill and people like that worked to make sure that this population was protected so they could live full and successful lives, and they do when they get the right resources. And to you as a parent, this is something we don't spend enough money on. I think the federal, actually one of my colleagues and friends, Jared Huffman, he has an autistic son. He's had bills every session to raise the amount of money to where it's federally required for the money we put in to kids with special needs, because we're not nearly funding the programs at the level that they're required statutorily. So feel free to contact the office. There's lots of things that we can do, and we work very closely with this community.
Thank you. The next question is from Cheryl. What are Congress's plans to combat disinformation in a timely manner to the major lies that Trump and his administration say on a daily basis?
Well, we should be doing, at a minimum, what the EU is doing. So I have a bill that is like tobacco and alcohol warning. When you go on your computer screen, when you go on social media, there'd be a warning sign from the Surgeon General. We've got plenty of research shows, just like with tobacco and other addictions, that it's addictive for a significant part of the population. I just finished a book by Nicholas Carr. I talk about him a lot, a book he wrote 15 years ago called The Shallows. His most recent book is a New York Times bestseller. I just finished it last night, called Super Bloom. And he's a neuroscientist, and he talks about how young people are getting addicted to the algorithms, and we know all this. The companies are directing, they want as much information about how you work and how where your weaknesses are, and then the computers just feed this stimulation to the point where they were targeting, YouTube was targeting young girls because women develop faster, no surprise to all us guys here, and better. But YouTube was actually, New York Times reporter found this, girls would get on who were being targeted and who had depression problems, not unusual for adolescents, but if they followed the algorithm all the way through, they'd get to a demonstration about how you can commit suicide. So when the New York Times reported that, YouTube apologized and said, "Oh, we'll protect you." It's just human nature. You need a police officer, and we need to provide that for Americans. The book I just read, he got to the end, he gave all these recommendations, many of which we're trying to do, but we can't get the votes because these are powerful corporations with a lot of money. That's my view. So at the end, he says, my recommendation is, whether it's your kids or you, get off. Just don't spend as much time. We already know a lot of the school districts here in California, the Bay Area, are requiring the kids to give up their phones. It's working. Yeah. So thousands of years of evolution, go for a walk. Read a book, talk to your friends. Technology is a great thing, and it will be a great thing, but we as a society have to figure out what the rules are, and Congress has to implement them. The level of anxiety I have on this, again, I have conversations with my friend Virginia Fox. I'm like, Virginia, the Education Committee should be having hearings every day with experts about what's happening to kids right now. This should be nonpartisan. So I'm hoping that will start happening.
Thank you, Congressman. And we have about 10 minutes remaining for additional questions. This next question is from Nick. It says, how will Congress help Ukraine?
Oh my God, this is so depressing. I have been to Ukraine. The question is, how does Congress help Ukraine? I think, so I go back on Monday. There is support for Ukraine in both parties. I've been to Kiev. I've been out to the front lines before this last incursion. I've been, as I mentioned, we developed a relationship with Russia. What happened in that country is completely unacceptable, and it impacts us here. I wish more veterans from World War II were here to tell their story about how what happens there impacts us here. And Ukraine was a vibrant, like all of the Eastern Bloc, they had their corruption problems. We have our corruption problems. They had worse. So particularly this administration in Ukraine have been working on that. It's no small, these are people with lots of power in these countries, Russia. So working through that to make it a vibrant, transparent democracy as best we can was something that was happening until Russia invaded. And it was a complete unethical violation of international law. There's no, the comments by the current president is just so Orwellian, it's bizarre from my perspective. Ukraine is an amazing country, the history is amazing. It's in a crossroads between the East and the West, historically. And they want their own country, and they want to be protected from historical influences from their neighbors. And that's particularly the Russians. So it's thousands of years of history, and what happened there is completely unacceptable. To answer your question is, next week we've got to get Republicans and Democrats to say the administration's wrong, and we've got to appropriate more funds to make sure that we get to a peaceful solution that's fair for the Ukrainians. They didn't invade Russia. Governor Winthrop said famously, when the Pilgrims left to come to the United States, he gave a speech about a biblical, where's Brother Chris? I hope I get it right, that we should always be as a city on the hill. We will be an example to others. You're choked up. Reagan brought this up. He kept talking about a shining city on the hill. We have to be an example. Bible also says, to those who much is given, much is expected. Here I am at St. Mary's. Brother Chris, I told you my mom always wanted to be a priest, so I guess If I get it wrong, please tell me. I don't want anyone to be, my mom to be upset with me. So we have a responsibility in Ukraine, and we've got to help them.
Thank you, Congressman. The next question is from Beth. What will House Democrats do to investigate conflicts of interest with Elon Musk, Doge, and his business enterprises?
I was on the Oversight Committee for the first 8 years I was in Congress. That would be a committee who should be doing these things, along with the Judiciary Committee. We'll be pushing the Republicans to have hearings on that. We already are. So let's be open and transparent about this. If he's got conflicts, he can't be the determinant of that. It's just human nature. I'm sorry. I have my own feelings about him. I've met with him a couple times personally. It was quite odd conversations, but he wanted me when I was in the chair of the Senate Transportation Committee. He called me in, what's up? He goes, well, I don't understand why my customers have to pay sales tax in California, but they don't in Oregon. At the time we were in a recession. I also had the budget subcommittee, because nobody else wanted it, that was in charge of cuts to health and human services. And his legislative person thought the meeting was quite funny because our faces kept getting. And I'm like, wait, you want me to carry a bill so that people who can afford a $100,000 car don't have to pay sales tax when I'm cutting billions of dollars from people who can't get fed every day? And he sort of looked at me like, yeah. I'm like, okay, never mind. So, again, it takes a lot of people and creative people and all kinds of people to make this country, but you can't have conflicts of interest. And you can't have these positions. It erodes the whole idea of trust in government. So we've got to hold him accountable. Most of that will be in the Oversight Committee and the Judiciary Committee, and I'm going to argue with my Republican colleagues it should be bipartisan.
Thank you. And we have time for one or two more questions. As a reminder, if your question was not asked tonight, as long as we have your contact information, we will be sure to respond to your question following the town hall. So the next question is from Mara.
You want mine? Usually I'm the one who breaks the microphone.
Next question is from Mara. What is the outlook for the midterms?
It's too early to tell. All the outlook in the last cycle was that Democrats would get the majority and pick up more. I have some criticisms about how we present ourselves in certain parts of the country. Well, I have the general policy as a former business owner. I didn't lecture my customers. I tried to listen to them, particularly the ones I was trying to persuade. So I believe you can be principled without lecturing people. So I can go into greater detail, but I'm making those arguments appropriately. Oh, we're sharing, yes.
Next question is from Susan. Funding is being cut at NIH for both cancer and Alzheimer's research. How can this possibly be considered an appropriate item to cut? This is essential.
I was just with an Alzheimer's group yesterday, and it can't be. So that was their argument, is what is going on. It shouldn't have even been brought up. But I'm very confident that we'll get that changed as well. My confidence is just because Republicans have cancer friends, constituents, and they have Alzheimer's folks. It's just, this is a great return on investment. NIH is amazing. I went out there and met with Dr. Collins when I first got to Congress, brilliant director who just retired, and he was telling me the Chinese are spending all kinds of money trying to replicate it. I mean, that's fine. Their life expectancy will be better for it, and we'll share, hopefully, that research. But the National Institutes for Health is a national treasure that every American should be proud of. So the thought that we'd cut any funding to that is crazy. I've been out there and stood behind kids who got graduate degrees from Stanford and Harvard and Johns Hopkins, and they're working at NIH because they want to do the right thing. We get great value out of the National Institutes for Health in America, and we should be fighting for more money for it, not less. So we'll do that.
Thank you, Congressman.
Oh, it's working.
The next question is from Michelle. What power do you and others in Congress genuinely have at this point towards saving our democracy?
Oh, boy. We're going to start doing some clips on our social media of my favorite movie clips about you've got to fight. You got to fight like hell. How many people have ever seen Kenneth Branagh's St. Crispin Day speech? Everybody go look it up when you go home. And, we've got to organize ourselves, ma'am. I explained to you, I'm doing it. Stop, please stop, because that doesn't work. People screaming is what happens with Democrats when we're all screaming at one another, or Americans. I can't organize political efforts in a government meeting, or I'll go in front of the ethics committee. So I have rules that I have to comply with here. I'm happy to talk to you about that outside of here.
Thank you so much, Congressman. And that is all the time that we have for questions today. So I want to turn it over to the Congressman for a few closing remarks.
Okay, so we've got a ton of questions we didn't answer, so we will answer those. I want to, first of all, ask you all to appreciate my wonderful staff. Janessa L'Oreal is our district director. Everybody else, raise your hand in the back, Carolyn. We're one of only 6 offices between the Senate and the House, 535 offices, who've been recognized twice by a nonpartisan group, nonprofit in DC for our constituent work, the Congressional Management Service, and because I have wonderful, wonderful staff. They work hard. We do lots of this. So thank you for that. Once again, I really want to thank St. Mary's and Moraga for being great hosts. Thank you so much. The police departments and all of you for coming. We'll keep doing these. Feel free to engage us, send us emails, call, ask us questions. And you can also Google me on the other side where I have infrastructure to help you connect to the appropriate people and not get in trouble with the ethics committee. So thank you all very, 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 very much.